I was having a conversation with my wife there. That's okay, right? That's legal? Hope so. We were talking, I mentioned to her we should go to that barbecue. That's this Wednesday, right? We should do that. It's like good food. How's everybody doing? Doing good? I'm doing good. Obviously, I had one little cup of coffee is all. So it's actually just natural. It's not just like, caffeinated. Well, a little bit. Hey, speaking of the barbecue, we do encourage you to join us as the information, you're given, and then also listed on your bulletin card for that get together. It's a get acquainted, and it's nice to meet new people, of course, but it's also equally as nice to connect with some people maybe you've passed by between services or, just haven't really kind of been able to connect with. And so I find that it's one thing that we have to actually fight to have in our culture, and that is closer relationships, because we are so busy with so many different things, and really important things for the most part. But what we probably could all agree on, we have an awareness through information to, say, social media or other things, but that's not quite the same as getting acquainted. Agreed? Having information is just not quite the same as having a meal together. I find it fascinating that Jesus frequently just had a meal with the guys. He didn't pass out an outline. I want you to study this before we eat because we're going to go over it during lunch. He just kind of hung out with them, And there's so much there to be said, not only in your relationship with God, but with one another. And so I encourage you, join us for this get acquainted. Bring something to eat, though. If you're going to eat, bring something to eat. Pretty simple. We all know how to eat, so that's not a problem. But we'll provide the meat, that kind of stuff. If you want to bring a side dish, that's another reason I love it, because there's some tremendous variety of stuff you haven't had before. So it's really a sweet time together. So that'll be this Wednesday. Also, you notice, if you would direct your attention to your info or your bulletin card, there's an encouragement or information to get involved in children's ministry. We had a children's ministry volunteer training. Mike led that last week and did a great job. We had a good turnout, got some new people on board, but we still have a lot of opportunities to get plugged in. We don't see it as a job. We see it as an opportunity. We see being able to share the gospel with our kids is a blessing. It actually changes our lives more than we realize. To be able to sit down with them in different classes and just serve them and bring the truth to them in a relevant way in regards to their age group and such. And it requires more than 30 volunteers a weekend to pull that off in this particular gathering, the way we go about it. So I encourage you, if you want to get involved there, I drew your attention to that not just because of that one part, but the word of the week underneath there reads this way, as you can look at it yourself and see. For as the body is one and has many members, but all the members of that one body, being many, are one body, so also is Christ. It conveys to us God's terms, God's reference, God's analogy that you and I are a part of a body. He uses that picture because we can kind of figure that out, because you got a body. So you can take what the truth is and you can okay. So kind of what he's saying is we each have a part. And so likewise with children's ministry or other areas to serve and to literally learn to serve one another, but as we serve the Lord, it's really fascinating how when each part does its part, everybody's doing well. Have you ever thought about that? Just what if the simple thing goes wrong with your body? What if you get a little hangnail on your big toe? And you foolishly just grab that dry hangnail and just give it a tug. It's not the best way to go about it, trust me. The experience tells me that. And so now you got this little glowing Rudolph-type big toe that it just bugs you. Because one little thing causes the whole body to be kind of out of kilter, and you have to adapt to it. And so that's why that analogy that God gives and shares through Scripture is really important to us to see there's no part that's of no value or unimportant. So I encourage you to get to know what the Lord's showing you, have an awareness of what your gifting is, how he would connect you and involve you, and just it's great study, but it's also something that should be applied and practiced. Today we're going to continue in the parable of the of teachings of Jesus. I started this last week. We looked at the parable of the sower. And we're going to continue with another parable today. It's one that I know, I actually love it because I do, in a weird way, like tackling some of the awkward texts. Because it's easier to avoid them. and then teach on 1 Corinthians 13. Love, love, everybody love, y'all be lovely, and everything's good. And then you kind of go home and love each other. It's easy, not easier, but, the text we're going to look at today is about forgiveness and being willing to forgive. And it's not an easy thing to apply. We can always think of someone who needs to forgive us, but we're not always quick to extend forgiveness. We can always think, right, of somebody who maybe has done you wrong, but do we realize clearly what the Lord's speaking to us about dealing with this issue? So before we dig in, I want to pray. I want to pray not only for this passage that God would speak to us and through his word, but also we would recognize his place in our life. We celebrate this week functionally the declaration of our independence. Agreed? It's a beautiful thing, I believe, personally. I'm an old school historian type. I don't think we have to rewrite what happened years ago. I think we can look at what did take place. I think we can look at history and say, man, God really brought this country together. And he really set a framework and a foundation, a constitution that really helped people kind of get a new perspective. So it started with this, ultimately, we know the document of the Declaration of Independence. And so that's awesome, I believe, nationally. It's great for us as citizens. It's not how you live as a Christian. The Declaration of Independence should also be reminded, we should remind ourselves, because of lordship, I have a declaration of dependence. I'm dependent upon the Lord to live out the life he's called me to live. And there's joy in that. It's actually a beautiful thing to know your relationship and know who you are. And so we're gonna pray and we're gonna dig into the text. God, thank you for this time to get together. We praise you for the work you have done. Lord, we recognize, according to your word, that you raise up nations and you take them down. You reign sovereignly, even as we were singing in these songs, Lord, as we are worshiping you and acknowledging how you reign over all. Things that we don't understand. It's confusing how some rulers and some kings and some people in power are so evil. For some reason, you allow it to continue. But yet we know you do reign, God. You are Lord, King of kings and Lord of lords. And so, Lord, we are thankful for what you have done in this country. We know that we, Lord, need to return to you and to cry out to you and to remind ourselves that we are dependent upon you. And so, Lord, teach us that as a country, as a nation, Lord, through the politics, through what's established, Lord, we pray for a work of the Spirit to transform us, to be people, individuals who know you as our King. Today, God, I would ask that you would stir our hearts, remind us of our part as Christians in this body, as you call it, that we participate in the work you're doing, physically, financially, prayerfully. Lord, that you would draw us to you and knit us together, guard us and protect us, Lord. May you do that today, even through your word. May you open up the things that we don't want to open. May you deal with the things we're unsure with how to deal with. May you give us a reservoir, a reserve, an awareness of your truth. That when the issue comes up, when the needs are before us, we would have your truth. We would know how to forgive, or we would know that we are forgiven. God, walk us through your word today. We ask this in your name, Jesus. Amen. Amen. All right, with that, would you turn with me to Mathew chapter 18. We're going to pick up in verse 21, but we're going to start our reading with verse 1, and then we're going to go to verse 21. You'll see the relevance as you can see what it says there. Jesus speaking to his disciples, and it's a point where they've been asking questions, they've been growing, they've been getting the concepts, they've been presented the principles, and he shifted, later in that 3 to 4 year public ministry to a practice of presenting parables. He started teaching, okay, so here's the truth, and some people were not really totally interested in that truth. So what he did is he laid alongside that truth a natural story, if you would, like we looked at last week, where the parable of the sower, and it talked about how when the seed was thrown out, it hit on different types of soil. It was a natural story that was pretty easy to get in the natural realm. And so as he lays that aside, he doesn't tie them together. He lets you tie them together. He actually does it in such a way, as we've seen from last week's text, that some would just not listen. They would go, oh, I get it. And they would not ponder or wonder, what's the point? Why is this teacher, this carpenter, traveling itinerant teacher, talking about planting seeds? See, he was expecting you and me and his disciples to say, hey, wait a minute, what are you talking about? How does that dovetail? What's the synchronization between those two stories? And so then his disciples, we know from last week, they came to him and said, I have no clue what you're talking about. And I want to remind you from last week, that's a good disciple. One who can honestly say, I don't get it. I've been walking with you a long time, and that's some good fish along the fire, and that's pretty impressive when you kind of go skipping across the seas, didn't sink. That was cool, but I have no clue what you're talking about. I don't get this point. See, that's a healthy state to be in when you realize your dependence upon him to teach you the truths he brings to you. And so as we seek, and go, okay, Lord, what does this parable mean? He's going to teach us. He taught them things that they needed to know. So the disciples, it says, they came to Jesus saying, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Now, there's some nice spiritually minded men. It's like, which one of us gets first seat? Who's back row? What's going on? And I don't mean to be too flippant with it, but it sets the framework, because Jesus will teach, as you can look out this week through your just now assigned homework, read chapter 18. And you see the different things that take place, and the things that Jesus says, they're pretty dramatic. They're pretty radical. They're really major issues that are really hard to follow, much like the Sermon on the Mount. But when you read through those and you see those, you'll see that he's actually taken what people that are hungry and wanting to know the truth. He's saying, okay, now listen, I want you to see things completely differently. So here they're asking this question. Let's pick up now in verse 21. Then Peter came to Jesus and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. And when he had begun to settle accounts, one who was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. But as he was not able to pay, his master commanded that he be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and that payment be made. The servant therefore fell down before him, saying, Master, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. Then the master of that servant was moved with compassion, released him, and forgave him the debt. But that servant went out and found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. And he laid hands on him and took him by the throat, saying, Pay me what you owe. So his fellow servant fell down at his feet and begged him, saying, Have patience with me, and I will pay you all. Verse 30, and he would not, but went and threw him into the prison till he should pay the debt. So when his fellow servants saw what had been done, they were very grieved and came and told their master all that had been done. Then his master, after he had called him and said to him, You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you begged me. Should you not also have had compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had pity on you? And his master was angry and delivered him to the torturers until he should pay all that was due to him. So my heavenly Father also will do to each of you from his heart who does not forgive his brother his trespasses. Easy text. We could actually shift to another parable at this point. You probably get it. No explanation needed. Obviously, this parable has a lot embedded in it that you're like, okay, how does that apply? Have you read through this before and go, you explained this parable of the sower. Could I get some details on this one, please? Could I get some insight on this? Well, let's look at a few things. And then I think as we dig into it, we have to, as we looked in verse 1, we have to catch the context. We have to kind of see what's shaping up and what's taken place. It gives us insight, when Jesus pauses and then teaches about the heavenly instruction for relationships. The disciples got along well with one another, by and large. And yet they were, as we can see from verse 1, comparing. They were competing. They were positioning themselves in front of each other. Sometimes it was like subconscious, or, sometimes I think maybe more covert. But the disciples of Jesus behaved just like every one of us. The disciples were looking head to toe at one another when they needed to be connected heart to heart. And the reason I say it's common is because we're foolish if we're unwilling to admit that we don't do that. It's just a natural, interaction. It's a relational reality. You may be encouraged because you see someone, loving the Lord, and, they pray, and there's such a genuineness to their life, and you're encouraged by that person. And so you kind of start looking to them, and that's biblical. There's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes in that process, we then start kind of breaking down and seeing where we fit and how we can move up a little bit. That's why the disciples were saying, who's the greatest in the kingdom? Who's the one that really is going to be right there? Now, when we recognize that, we want to realize that ultimately what's happening, they were busy trying to bring their old life into a new discipline. Bring their old life, before they met Christ, they're trying to bring it into a new discipline. See, previously they didn't participate in the things that Jesus taught because they were unaware. But now they're trying to modify their behavior and adjust how they live so that they'll be doing well. Many today are trying to clean up their act, trying to change habits and patterns and behavior. And it sounds good. It certainly has some social merit. The problem is you cannot change the carnal, old self-life into a godly life. It's not possible. You cannot change the old person into a good person. What must happen? The Bible tells us you must be born again. You must be born again. Now, I believe that's one of the most overlooked truths in our experience with Jesus. I know it has been in mine. You must be born again. Well, what's that mean? It means born of the Spirit. Your old life, your old ways, the way you used to deal with things, in giving your life to God, in acknowledging your sin, and receiving the forgiveness from Jesus Christ. In doing that, you turned everything over to Him. The Bible tells us quite basically, one must die to the old nature and then experience the power of forgiveness, for we are new creatures in Christ. So it's that power of forgiveness that's an experience that as we know it, as we hold on to it, we then live differently. It's where we'll go with this as we get into detail. We must realize that we are born again, born of the Spirit. This new life in the old body, and there lies the problem, correct? Part of me wonders and wishes and thinks, now I just kind of have silly ideas every now and then. You may know that already. But I just think, it would have been cool when you're born again, born of the Spirit, that you got a whole new body to start with. You didn't have to carry the baggage of the old one, the appetites and the desires, the hurts and the heartaches and all the junk. You could just boom, start new. Well, that's what they call heaven. That happens later, okay? In this place, at this time, we start with what we've got. God in His wisdom chose to rebirth you in the same body. You would be born of the Spirit. And so that's our challenge. We're so familiar with and loyal to the old nature that we promote, protect, and provide for our selfishness by adapting old patterns into the spiritual life. By adapting old patterns and bringing them into the spiritual life, this new life. You see it. We've experienced it. We've done it, if we're honest. Approving what God does not approve. Doing what God says do not do. Living in ways that God says do not live that way. I'm talking about the church. And it's not that the church has regressed and got to the point now that it's so much worse than the first century. If you read 1 Corinthians, you would be hard-pressed to say that the church is worse now than it was then. Really. I mean, the sexual immorality, the corrective nature of the first 11 chapters of that book indicate to you and me this has always been an issue. And when you look through the New Testament letters, you see all this correction and all this exhortation and all this warning about false doctrine, about false teaching. See, all those things are present because, quite honestly, what we're trying to do is we're trying to live a good spiritual life in these bodies, but quite honestly, we're too often too much like the world. I believe it's part of the reason that in the church, among professing believers, the divorce rate is as high or higher than the non-believers. Addictions, various behavioral issues. There's not a clear distinction. It's not like theoretically, ideally, we would see. The church, following God's standard, would not be in the same state as the world that does not know him. It should be like, can we agree? Theoretically, wouldn't it be so much different? But it's not. And so why is that? Well, a few things we're going to see today. And partly because Christians trying to look good on the outside and functionally forgetting they are a new creation in Christ. So let me be very foundational, very essential. What is the new creation? A new creation has a born-again experience. An individual who maybe has sat at us and listened to a sermon, or maybe was catching outreach on TV, whatever was happening, the Word of God was brought to a person, to you or to me as Christians, and our sin was revealed. It might not have been in detail, sometimes it is, but we're brought to an awareness of our own state, that we're separated from God. That's a work of the Spirit. And that happens. God brings us to that awareness, and we respond to that truth by receiving his gift, his grace, his unmerited favor. You can't have a born-again experience because your spouse had one. You can't have one because your grandma had one, or your relatives or your close friends. It's a personal experience that you should be able to reference. And sometimes people go to church for years, for decades, and they learn Christian behavior, and they follow some form of cultural Christ-likeness. But it's not really what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches that you and I individually have to have a born-again experience where we know the forgiveness of God, we're aware of the work of God, and then we're being taught in the ways of God from that point forward. I don't hold to you have to have a hour, minute, day moment, but there is something, and you can see it. You can look back and go, things have changed over the last 20 years, but that's when I was changed. Things have varied over the years, but that's when I was a new person. Something changed on the inside. There was this truth, these promises of God that were brought to me, and they were revealed, and by his amazing presence and grace, I accepted them. I agreed with him. And at that moment, the Bible says that you were born again. I wish we'd have popped out an all-seeing eye right in the middle. I wish we'd have grown another ear in the back of the head to hear what the Spirit says. But we didn't. There's no physical manifestation upon the human frame that says, boom, Christian, born again, bingo. Because it's inside, it's in the heart. It's a work that takes place. So to live this life we've read about and extend this forgiveness, a person has to have a born-again experience. And because you're born again, you're a new life. That picture is being presented to us that we're just freshly birthed, so to speak. You would have a hunger for spiritual food. A born-again Christian has a hunger for spiritual food, an appetite. That's why the things you used to eat don't sound so good anymore, because you have a new appetite. You used to engage through the senses in certain activity that used to be pleasurable. But because you have a born-again experience, you've been started with God, you're being brought up on this pure milk of the Word. Because of that, you hunger for the new stuff, and you're kind of turned off by the old stuff. As a matter of fact, it's quite offensive. It's somewhat repulsive to you because you have an appetite. See, sometimes we think, oh, I overslept. I forgot to read. I have to read the Word today. You do not ever have to read the Bible. Ever. You do not have to read the Bible. You get to. You get to. I get to. We get to. We get to absorb and feed upon the very truth of eternity. The very revelation and the declaration of who God is, of what He's done, and how much He loves us. That's something we get to do. We have to rethink the way we think. Because most of us, myself included, there's too many times I think, oh, I got to do that. I don't got to do that. I get to. I get to. The very God of creation indwells you and me as born-again Christians. And He teaches us and walks us through the Word. But as young children, as babes in Christ, we have to choose to feed that appetite. Because I believe all of us have a hunger for God, a hunger for the Word when you're born again. But I believe you can eat a lot of Twinkies and never have a good sandwich. I believe you can eat a lot of junk and never be spiritually nourished. You can feed on radio, you can feed on comment, you can feed on Facebook, and you can find a lot of biblical truth and no meat, no substance, because you're not consuming it. You know, it's kind of like walking into a buffet. Wow, look at that. That's awesome. Just smelling it up. Man, this is awesome. Oh, that's so cool. And then walking out the door. It's like, well, did you see all that food? Yeah, it's awesome. Well, why are you telling me you're hungry? Well, I didn't eat any. Dude, you're not going to, probably a great weight loss plan. Just smell food. Don't eat anything, Staple your lips shut and just going to walk around sniffing stuff. But you're going to be malnourished, and it's a true and spiritual parallel. We find ourselves, there are two things we've looked at. A new creation has a born-again experience that's personal, deep, intimate, and transformative. A new creation, a new person born again, has a hunger for spiritual food. The third thing that Jesus is going to teach even in more depth here, a new creation, a new creature, born-again person, has a knowledge of forgiveness. Not forgiveness in a concept. Not in a social act or extension. A born-again Christian, you and I, we need to remind ourselves of our forgiveness, of what God has forgiven us from. I love group gatherings. I love, the time we can have and getting to know each other and conversation and all that stuff. But really what's brought us together is either a desire for forgiveness deep down. It may be masked by other motives as we first come to church. But there's this desire for forgiveness, or there's this awareness of forgiveness. I'm forgiven because, how's the song go? Because He was forsaken. I'm accepted. I'm brought in. Why? Because He was condemned. I'm alive and well. His Spirit dwells within us. That's what we sing when we gather. Don't we worship with that song? Isn't it powerful? Because it's a reminder, me, you, God's saying, don't forget I've forgiven you. And you may want to meditate. Don't get too condemning, but just remember what a nutcase you were. What a moral monster you were. What an ethical idiot you were. Just remember. It's what God has forgiven you from. And the Bible says this so beautifully. Those who have been forgiven much have an expression. Those who have been forgiven much do what? They love much because they're aware of their forgiveness. This is what's so beautiful, it's so confusing. The more I grow as a Christian, and it's 30 years now, but the more I draw near to God, the more I experience the truth of His forgiveness, the more I walk in that truth, the more I'm formed and shaped by His power and presence, the more aware of what a mess I am. That's what I said. The more aware of what a mess I am. No, Dan, you got it wrong. The more you mature, the more you grow closer to Christ, the more you realize you're not as bad as other people. No, here's the deal. See, when I realize, I know more now, the depth, the depravity, and the darkness of my sin. I know it more now than I did 30 years ago. And you know what? That doesn't make me defeated. It doesn't cause me to say, I'm such a loser. What's it cause me to do? Oh, I'm forgiven because you were forsaken. I'm accepted because you were condemned. I'm alive and well because your Spirit is within me. And what you've started, you'll be faithful to finish. And so, God, I apologize for being such a knucklehead. I apologize for being so stubborn. And I say that. Lord, I think I should have learned in 12 years what you've been patiently teaching me over 30. I personally believe that. I think there's just things I should have got, and I still don't get. But guess what? I know my forgiveness. And the more I draw nearer to him, it just makes sense. Beauty, purity, light. As we draw near to it, we're going to notice that's not us. That's not me. But yet we're being transformed into his image and his likeness. What Jesus is about to teach his disciples is all about knowing his forgiveness. The passage is not about salvation. It's about knowing his forgiveness and extending that forgiveness. The parable we're looking at is laid alongside this truth. And I know there's more to it, but the truth is, what you experience, you express. What you experience, you express. What you know, you may not express. Not always. You just may know something. You could be aware of a certain rule or instruction, but not really do anything. But there's a life experience that I would be trying to communicate and correlate is when you experience forgiveness, you express forgiveness. When you know you've been forgiven, when that is deep and real, and you recognize what he has done for you, then the natural byproduct is you would express that. You would make that known. Rather than competing against one another, you'll be coming alongside one another, thinking more of the other person than you're thinking of yourself, because you're aware of your forgiveness. I love the way Gail Irwin presents it. He talks about being others-centered throughout his books, the Jesus style and Spirit style, Father style. It's a great read if you want to dig into it. But he's teaching the others-centeredness is a result of knowledge of forgiveness. We got 3 minutes to finish this parable. It can be done. It just won't be. Verse 21. The Jewish leaders taught that if you forgive someone 3 times, then that's pretty much going out on a limb. That's really being a gracious person. And Peter, getting this principle, what Jesus is presenting, as far as what he's been teaching about how to treat people and how to engage and how to deal with offenses, and he's like, okay, I'm getting it. So Jesus, how many times should I forgive a brother if he's done things wrongly and directly hurt me and implied things about me? How many times? I mean, like 7? I mean, he's probably going, whoa. I'm sure the other disciples like, dude, 4 is pushing it. 4 is kind of up there. And so Jesus just kind of rolls with him. Peter's willing to go beyond the norm. See, I commend him for that. He's willing to more than functionally double what the standard was. But Jesus says, let's see, 7, D times 7. Let's start with 490 times, Pete. Let's start right there. That's how many times you would forgive. This is a table-turning talk, if you would. This is much like when he turned the tables over in the temple. Because this is so radical, so out of place, so unrealistic. He's turning everything upside down because Jesus is teaching you and me relationships are not about keeping score. Relationships are not about keeping score. God's design in his love is for his love to be the center point and the power point. His love enables us to love beyond our former capacity. Agreed? I mean, let's be serious. If you're looking at this and he's saying, well, you got to forgive someone up at 500 times almost. You'd be like, okay, well, what if they did this and what if they did that? And it gets really complicated. He's teaching us that love has to be the center point. See, we can love. We have the power to love for what reason? The Bible tells us that we love because he first loved us. So that love that was extended, that love that was received, that the love at the moment of being born again, that love is embedded, implanted, a part of you. So where you and I could not love in the way that Jesus speaks of our own capacity, we can love when we realize that he dwells within us. We can love when we realize, okay, I can't forgive them, but your love in me can teach me how to forgive them. You working through me can accomplish what you instruct me. You showing me how to love means, yes, I can love them. So his love enables us to love beyond our capacity, our former capacity. And then focusing on what his love has done for us takes our eyes off of what others have done to us. See, there really is the central point, if you can think about it. When you focus on what someone's done to you, it's hard to look at the love you've received. Agreed? You kind of go, bing. You can't look at both. You have to pick one or the other. And he's teaching, when we're aware of his love then changes what we think about. His love is the center of our attention. See, born-again people are called to bear the likeness of their God, of their Father. Born-again Christians, which would probably be most of us would accept that classification, that categorization. Born-again Christians should bear the likeness of God, their Father. You know, many of us have not had a great relationship with our natural father, but you still bear some likeness. I've been blessed because my dad come to Christ here just recently, and we've had some great conversations and great interaction. And so I've got to live with, some different things as a younger person and, a punk and dealing with my dad. My dad got really smart when I got to be about 35. He was an idiot when I was like 15 to 30. He didn't know anything, and then all of a sudden, he suddenly got smart because he knew all this stuff I didn't know he knew. Well, even in that season where we weren't in very good conversation, there was still a likeness. There were still certain mannerisms. And as I get older, I start noticing we kind of look alike. There's some similarities. That big old ski beak, nose thing, I'm blaming Dad for that. Different things like, wow, there's a similarity. And I actually have on my iPad here 4 generations. My grandson, my son, myself, and my dad. And it's really cool because you look at it and wow, there's some similarities to the Father. Do you see the parallel in the picture in the spiritual realm? That there should be some similarities evidenced and manifested as we grow. Born-again people bear the likeness of their Father. This story is laid alongside that relational truth. I'm not going to break down the story. I think it's self-explanatory. It is interesting, though. This guy owes so much, multiple millions in that day. And there's just such an extreme amount. 10,000 talents was so ludicrous. The guy had to be working for the king. In all probability, many commentators believe he was skimming, basically stealing to get that much debt. And so he basically, it seems to be that he has done the balance sheet. He doesn't have enough assets, and he's got a huge amount of debt. More than a lifetime, multiple lifetimes to pay back. And so he owes so much. And so he's told, listen, you got to pay. That was a cultural thing. It was a common thing. That you've accrued this debt. You owe this amount. It involves your family. They've benefited from what you received. They'll be a part of the paying back of the debt. So they were all just chucked into the debtor's prison. So that's what's going to happen to him. But the king, we're told, is moved with compassion. And this person has this huge debt forgiven. And so the magnitude of that debt should have changed his life, should have changed him. That's the principle being presented. The measure of that debt should have caused him to say, in just logical relational reality, when this other person comes to him and owes 100 days worth of wages, is basically all he's behind, this man should have responded in a realization of his experience, you know what, I'm just going to let it go. I'm just going to write it off. I'm just going to forgive you of that debt. But he didn't, did he? What's the story tell you and me? He didn't forgive. He was unwilling to forgive. He was not willing to recognize what had been forgiven of him. And so because he didn't realize, he didn't own, he didn't experience the depth of forgiveness, he was unwilling to extend it. He did not express it. I got to finish with verse 35 because it says, my Father, or my heavenly Father also will do to you if each of you from his heart does not forgive his brother his trespasses. This is not, if you don't forgive, you lose your salvation, because that's a whole nother discussion. Your salvation is not based on your performance. This is not a salvation discussion. But it is to some degree. Because Jesus said, if you can't forgive, you have not experienced forgiveness. So I would say to you today, If you will not forgive, have you been forgiven? Oh, it's easy to say yes because you want to get into the kingdom. You want to go to heaven. But if you will not forgive, doctrinally, biblically, you have to question your own salvation. You have to say, well, why will I not forgive? Because if you understood the majesty, the magnitude, the depth, the beauty of your own forgiveness, then you could say in humility, I don't want to forgive that person. I don't like that person. I don't feel like forgiving that person. But I'm forgiven because you were forsaken. And because I have been forgiven, could you show me how to forgive that person? Could you open up and create in me the right heart? Renew a steadfast spirit within me, O Lord. Teach me how to forgive that person through your power because of your love. And so that's how it's lived out. Do you see the connection? Because if we won't forgive, we got to question why. When you truly experience his forgiveness, you are changed from the inside out. You can forgive, and you'll choose to forgive. Because those who have been forgiven much, love much. And here's the truth of forgiveness. It eats you up more than it bothers them if you won't forgive. If you harbor it and you hold on to it, it gets worse and worse. It's where bitterness comes from and where all kinds of other challenges come from. Because relationally, we separate ourselves from the very instruction of God. And we say, you know what? It's different. If you knew what they did to me, if you knew all the hurts there. I've talked to people that have experienced horrible sexual abuse. I've talked to people who have had their siblings, their children killed. And God has put on their heart, you have to forgive that person that killed your children. And I'm not that super spiritual. I have a hard time instructing them. You got to forgive this person. Because I like to throttle the guy. I like to drop him. But that's my old nature. That's not God's instruction. And so the Bible says you've been forgiven. And there's some beautiful stories and accounts through history when people have been horribly wronged, who chose to love God and said, you know what, by your power, with your love as the center point, you will enable me to forgive that person. And they have done it. And they have been freed. They have been liberated from this bitterness and hardness. And sometimes the person who received the forgiveness, his life is transformed because they respond to something because they would have never done what was just done to them because they know they didn't deserve it, and that's extended. I'd like to have Greg come back up. We are going to close our time with communion and a song. I'm sure you understand to tackle a text such as this or, to deal with things topically. My goal is not to give you all the answers. My goal is to stir the pot. My desire is that there would be a stirring and a hunger and a curiosity. And as I said, you go home and you dig in and you take hold of what God has showed you today. Because I think in this room, I'm confident, I know this, hearts are touched, minds were stirred, emotions were rocked. And God's doing that to you. I'm not. I don't know your deal. But God is doing that. Why does he do that? Because he loves you. And he doesn't want you held captive to these things. And so, the God of creation has spoken to you this morning. Man, if you get a call from the president, you'd probably tell your buddies about it. But the God of creation, the King of Kings, has spoken to you this morning, and he wants you to hold on to that truth. And look at that verse and think about that principle. And he wants you to study it tonight and think about it tonight and mull it over and lay it before him. And believe that he who began a good work will be faithful to complete it. That he will carry you through the week. Don't let those truths slip away in the busyness of the week. They're powerful. They're life-changing. And you know what happens to most of us? We forget them by Tuesday. We forget them by Tuesday. May it not be. Let's stand together.